Right, so Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the LSE Future of Pakistan Conference 2022. My name is Mustafa Hiraj, and as president of the LSESU Pakistan Development Society, it is a pleasure to have you all here. The third session for our conference that is taking place now is going to be about Pakistan's security policy in the aftermath of the events of August 15th that took place in Afghanistan and the following takeover of the Taliban. And introducing our honorable speaker for the segment is Dr. Moeed Yusuf, Pakistan's 8th National Security Advisor. Dr. Yusuf's career has revolved around strategic and peace-building studies. Interested in this field from a very early age, Dr. Yusuf joined the political science department at Boston University as a PhD student. Soon afterwards, he started teaching political science and international relations. He has taught at Boston University, George Washington University, Lahore University of Management Sciences, and Quaid-e-Azam University. Dr. Yusuf's experience as a practitioner in the field of international affairs is quite versatile, having served at several international organizations. These include being the Associate Vice President for Asia and the Institute of Peace in Washington, D.C. He is also a former research fellow at the Mosawar Rahmani Center at the Harvard Kennedy School. Before being appointed as the National Security Advisor of Pakistan, he served as the chairperson of the Strategic Policy Planning Cell under the National Security Division for a 2-year period. Unfortunately, Dr. Moeed Yusuf won't be with us in person today due to some matters of national security back home. However, we will have him over Zoom. Our moderator for this session is Dr. Farzana Shaikh, a fellow at Chatham House and an expert on foreign policy of South Asia. Just a few minutes before I hand it over to Dr. Shaikh, you are not allowed to take any photos or videos during the talk. You are expected to maintain discipline and order while the speaker is speaking. After the moderated discussion comes to a close, the floor will be open to the audience for a question and answer session. If you have any questions, please raise your hand and someone from the host team will come to you with a microphone. Your questions must be appropriate and precise, and the speaker reserves the right to not answer them if they deem them unfit. With that, over to you, Dr. Shaikh.
Ma'am, I'm sorry. I can't hear you too well. The microphone seems to be a bit far from where you are. Not really. Are you, if it's one of the ones hooked to your cord, if you just move it slightly further up, it'll be better. No, it's actually worse. It's hollow. It's almost like you're away from the mic.
I could. Is that any better?
Yes, that was much better. That was much better.
Well, let's take this off. So I'll just resume what I said very briefly. Again, this is not working, is it?
Actually, I can hear you perfectly fine. There was an echo, but I can hear you much.
Can you hear me now? And can the audience hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you better.
Okay, that's great. So as I was saying, I wanted to actually structure this discussion along 3 axes. The first will, of course, center on the new national security policy, of which you are seen to be the chief architect. The second node of discussion, I thought, particularly in light of global events at the present time, will be to consider the whole question of Pakistan's independent foreign policy, and particularly Pakistan's relations with Russia at a time when President Putin faces global condemnation owing to his invasion of the Ukraine, and finally sort of end with what all this might mean in terms of precisely extending that discussion on Pakistan's independent foreign policy with regard to Pakistan's position on Afghanistan, India, and of course, most vitally, this very, very delicate course it is having to tread between the United States on the one hand and China on the other. So are you happy with sort of the way I've laid things out, Dr. Yusuf?
You are the moderator. I'll go with whatever you say. I'm
Okay.
perfectly fine.
Well, let's start with this new national security policy that was announced earlier this year. Now, it's been cast as a radical departure from earlier policies by adopting what many see as a holistic approach, which combines both traditional military defense and human security, prioritizing the citizen. And of course, as we know, this is not the first security policy for Pakistan. We've had previous such policies announced in 2013 and 2014, which were also hailed for breaking new ground. Now, this new national security policy's accent on what it calls a citizen-centric approach has been welcomed in some quarters, but I think it's fair to say that it is still seen by most as a set of aspirations rather than a concrete plan of action. And many have been led to wonder how precisely this new security policy expects to deliver a security for the citizen without at the same time underscoring its commitment to strengthening institutions such as Parliament, or indeed encouraging citizens to debate freely through an independent media. Now, I think it's notable here and worth observing that this new national security policy, despite its citizen-centric approach, was not in fact first presented to Parliament, which is, of course, the premier forum for the expression of citizens' opinions and views. And although this policy did claim, at least the document claims, to have consulted widely, I think 120 experts and 500 specialists, the National Assembly of Pakistan and the Senate were bypassed. Again, I think it's worth saying, in the light particularly of what is going on in Pakistan at the moment, that the NSP's accent on prioritizing the welfare of the citizen is judged by some to be somewhat compromised by the recent curbs on freedom of expression through this very controversial amendment to the 2016 Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act via an ordinance whose provisions, of course, have been described by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court as nothing short of draconian and possibly in contravention of Article 19 of Pakistan's constitution, which guarantees free speech. So, what's your take on this? But let's start with why you think this policy will succeed when others have failed. Dr. Yusuf.
Thank you. Let me first of all thank LSE for this opportunity. I really did want to be there, and I apologize I couldn't make it because of some pressing work commitments back in Pakistan, but hopefully next time. Look, on NSP, first of all, let me just explain what the document is, because I think some of what you've also laid out in your remarks seems to expect too much from the document. This is not a strategy. This is not a plan. This is an umbrella, overarching statement of intent and vision for what Pakistan sees the concept of national security to be and where it sees its country going within that paradigm. It's a statement of intent for the world as well as for its own citizens. Now, why this national security policy? And let me also clarify, this is the first national security policy. What you're referring to is the national internal security policy, which is a subset of this policy. I mean, there have been more than one internal security policies. There have been foreign policy, there's been food and security policy, etc. But we've never had an overarching umbrella document, which is the national security policy. In terms of the makeup of this document, what is it saying? It's essentially saying that Pakistan had and has one basic problem, due to which it is unable to provide for its citizens as much as it would want to as one of the largest countries of the world. Human security is a function of economic security at the end of the day. You have to have resources to be able to support adequately a size of population that Pakistan has. We're not a small country. If you're the fifth, sixth largest country in the world, your demands on resources are much higher than any other country which is much smaller. In our case, the problem is that our resource inflow is smaller than our resource outflow, i.e., the size of our national resource pie is simply not large enough to be able to do everything we need to do to truly provide human security, to truly secure ourselves in terms of defense and hard security, and to have the kind of economic strength and muscle that we wish to have. Because the size of the national resource pie is not large enough, you end up in this guns versus butter debate, rather than looking at how we can increase and expand the size of this pie so that we have adequate resources to fund both our human security and our traditional or hard security. That's sort of the approach that this document takes. It talks about geoeconomics as the fulcrum on how you would achieve this. What is geoeconomics? It's essentially talking about Pakistan looking at development partnerships, not only assistance, which means export-led growth, foreign direct investment, increase in inflows of capital and resources. And what does Pakistan do with its location? It talks about its location as a geo-economic location, essentially thereby meaning that we want to look at connectivity as one of the avenues through which we can gain more economic resources. And for both of these, there is a prerequisite. The prerequisite is internal strength and security and peace in the region in which we exist. Okay. That's essentially the approach we take. Let me just complete. At least give me enough, as much time as you took to frame this. Now, the obvious question that comes out of this is, okay, great, you're talking about development partnerships, you're talking about connectivity, you're talking about peace, but where is it? And the answer I would give you, which will also answer your other question about this may be aspirational, absolutely it is aspirational. It does not reflect today's reality, because if it were to reflect today's reality, then there would be no point looking at a national security policy which tells us where we want to go in the future. Now, the policy comes out at a time where the situation in the region is suboptimal. The situation in the world is suboptimal. We've got two countries to our west who are internationally sanctioned. We've got an India to the east where the situation is what it is and has been for a number of years, and where India is going, unfortunately. It's a very sad tale. And we've got sea to the south. And China, of course, we've done very well with in terms of connectivity. So yes, it is not an optimal scenario. What we have to do is now figure out and work out how we move closer to this aspiration. So what are we doing? We are opening up to Central Asia for the first time through Afghanistan, the connectivity corridor that we are trying to connect. Our marine economy or our blue economy has been underexploited. So we are now putting emphasis on that. CPEC in China, you of course know already. But at the same time, we are also inviting the US, the UK, and the rest of the world to invest in CPEC. Don't look at CPEC or connectivity as a bilateral engagement. We are talking about co-investing in Afghanistan.
Okay,
the entire world can benefit.
We'll get to Afghanistan and CPEC in a minute. I just want to return to the question of the emphasis and accent on citizen security in the national security policy. And one of the things that it does do, apart from this emphasis on citizen security, is lay stress on what it calls national cohesion. Now, you know, as I'm sure you know, there continues to be concern over how precisely these objectives of citizen security and national cohesion are going to be realized against the background of mounting cases of so-called enforced disappearances, especially in Balochistan, but also elsewhere in Sindh and KP. I mean, according to a 2019 report, which I have here issued by the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan, 47,000 Baloch and around 35,000 Pashtuns were said to be, quote, missing. And in the 4-month period, from January to April 2021, the federal government's Commission of Inquiry of Enforced Disappearances received 952 new complaints of enforced disappearances from across the country. I mean, don't you think that this sort of casts a bit of a shadow on the claims being made by the national security policy? To which I would like to add, of course, that as relevant to this accent on citizens' security is concerned about the security of Pakistani citizens living abroad, whose dissident views, it is feared, have made some of them the targets of Pakistan's military and intelligence agencies. As you know, a court in London recently convicted a British Pakistani man who was found to have been hired to kill a Pakistani dissident, an anti-military blogger who is said to be living in hiding in Rotterdam. So I just wonder how you would respond to that. I will take up your question about geoeconomics in a minute, but I wonder if you would like to say something about this aspect of human security that I have just pinpointed.
Frankly, these questions are best left to media interviews and not to an academic environment. I thought I was here to have a conversation in an academic conference. But anyways, let me answer. First of all, the national security policy makes no claim. It lays out, as I've said, the vision and the intent of where Pakistan wants to go. How is it going to be executed? We have a entirely comprehensive implementation plan, which is not part of the public document. We have our entire federal system, provinces, other agencies who are going to be linked together to ensure that we begin to implement what is laid out there. Very specific actions that are there, they couldn't be public, and thus this is a fair question that's come up, but we very much know what we have to do. It's not going to be tomorrow, it's not going to be the day after, but this is a long-term plan which will take time to realize in terms of its results. As far as this issue is concerned, look, I mean, it could be a he said, she said, and we can continue this conversation. Pakistan's gone through a very difficult time in terms of terrorism. So yes, if people who were caught either in the crossfire or went to fight or were part of, frankly, the wrong side in a number of cases, this did come up. It's gone to courts. The courts have looked at it, and the state and the courts are involved in making sure that if there were any wrongs committed on any side, we try and unearth and identify, as mature states should do. And that process will continue. That has nothing to do with the national security policy. The policy, of course, talks about making sure that in the future, if there are any weaknesses in the system across the board, we address them. And if there are any strengths, we benefit from them. This is the NSP is not talking about this case or that case, right? I mean, this is a broad umbrella document, as I said. As far as this question of dissidents, etc., I think the Pakistani government and the High Commission have very formally, publicly rebutted this. And I want to be absolutely clear that the Pakistani state has never been and will not be and is not in any such business. Yes, we are a country that suffers from a perception deficit. Yes, every single piece of news that comes out in the West somehow has to be believed about Pakistan. But I hope that these kind of settings are more objective and more fair. As I know it, I was told just today through media, including the Western media, that perhaps my visit was called off by the UK government, my visa was cancelled, and that's why I'm not there. I can assure you that's not true, and many other things that you hear are not. So let's be clear that if we are going to talk about these things, we must look at both sides of the story. Pakistan is a country that's focused on human security. It is a country that wants to gain from its increasing size as a national resource pie in terms of economic security. That's where we are going. Yes, criticism will continue, but as the results of this NSP become evident, inshallah, we'll have a more positive conversation.
Good. Yes, we did actually wonder what the basis or what the reason for the cancellation of your visit were, but I mean that's not something we want to go into here. But really, I suppose the reason I raised those questions about enforced disappearances and the targeting of dissidents abroad is because one would be hard-pressed to ignore these considerations when so much is being made of, the security of citizens, citizen security, and the accent on the welfare of the citizens. But thank you for that response. I do want to just pick up on the point that you have made about the shift in Pakistan's orientation from a geopolitical to a geo-economic hub. Now, it seems to me that this is significant, but some of us are left wondering how precisely the policy and policymakers intend to deliver on this vision or this objective, given Pakistan's parlous economic condition, the as yet very modest gains in establishing regional connectivity and trade with neighbors, and indeed Pakistan's problems with attracting foreign investment. As you know, it has just been announced that Pakistan is to remain on the grey list of the FATF. I mean, would you agree that really in order for Pakistan to succeed in its so-called geo-economic pivot, it would have to pursue meaningful reforms before it can deliver on economic security that would translate in some sense, of course, into human security, or indeed transfer the dividends of a strong economy into a robust defense program. And I'm sure you know that many have wondered whether, you know, why the NSP has not wanted to spell out precisely how it will realize these objectives. I mean, in a document of 110 pages, only 50 have been published. Why? Dr. Yusuf? Have you disappeared?
Hello?
I can see you now.
Hello?
Did you get that? Did you get the question?
Part of it. I think you're still talking about why, something about 110 pages.
I beg your pardon?
Something about 110 pages is where I lost you.
Ah, yes. So you got most of it. I was just saying that, you know, one of the difficulties of sort of trying to understand how precisely the new security policy is going to deliver on this vision is surely tied to the fact that the document, which is about, well, which is over 100 pages, 110 pages roughly, only 50 have been published. And you know, many people have wanted to know why. Can you explain? I mean, it's a fairly elementary question, but we still need an answer.
I accept it's making it difficult for you to know how it's going to be implemented, but it's the people who have to implement it who should know how it's going to be implemented. I don't see why the state of Pakistan should be forced to, you know, tell the world how it plans to implement a vision that it's laid out. And frankly, we looked at the entire world. We didn't find a single country where the entire document of this nature is actually made public. You have versions, you have you know, strategies that are laid out. The US puts it out, other countries do, but sort of the mother document, there are always reasons why, and good reasons. So, you know, the implementation, and it is not that there's anything top secret about it, but you don't want to create unnecessary controversy about things when the statement has been laid out and the intention is there. You know, I just sort of tie this to something you said earlier, which I don't want to sort of let go unanswered, that somehow the Parliament or the National Assembly of Pakistan was in the dark. This policy was presented to the National Security Committee of our Senate and National Assembly combined on the 6th of December. There was a hearing under the Speaker of the National Assembly. The session very much took place, and there was feedback that was received from it. So it's absolutely incorrect. You know, the media can continue and political debates can continue, but it was very much presented. I mean, I think this is really a minor issue. The point is, you know where Pakistan wants to go.
It's a minor issue to bypass Parliament.
I just told you that the Parliament wasn't bypassed, ma'am. There is a process that the Pakistani Parliament follows. It was followed, and whatever was needed was done. What is a minor issue is whether others sitting outside are having difficulty knowing how we're going to implement it. I don't think that is a central issue for the NSP. The central issue is the statement of where Pakistan wants to go, what it's looking at, and, you know, how it is viewing itself as a country moving forward. I think that's really what the debate should be. Even if I were to tell you every single step that we are going to take, frankly, it won't add to this debate. And this is the more important debate. As far as your geoeconomics and the question of connectivity, and yes, absolutely. I told you it's a very suboptimal situation. You know, one country to our west, Iran, is internationally sanctioned, not of our making. There is a lot of potential, like any other neighbor, if that wasn't the case. But yes, at this point, we are hamstrung. Afghanistan, yes, there is a situation. Everybody knows there is a serious problem of liquidity. Afghans, Western media is reporting Afghans are being forced to sell their children and starving, and yet we are still worried about what kind of sanction and what bank account can work or not work. Not of our making. Yes, it's suboptimal. India, not many in the West want to talk about it, but the kind of questions you just asked me, you can multiply it by 100 and have that conversation there. We have responses entirely.
You're breaking up now. Sorry, can you hear me, Dr. Yusuf? You just broke up, and I'm not sure that the audience heard you. Sorry.
Where did you lose me?
Yes.
Where did you lose me?
Do continue. Do continue.
Yeah, all I'm saying is, so yes, it is a very suboptimal situation. So what are we doing? First of all, we are reforming our economy internally. There have been a number of reforms that have been undertaken in the past 3 years. In fact, one of the critiques that this current government gets is we don't see those kind of reforms delivering. And the reason is we are not looking at short-term band-aid kind of solutions. We are looking at structural reforms, and they're going to take time to manifest in terms of the benefits. That has to happen. You're absolutely right. Reform without reform, of course, why would investors invest, and why would trade increase? But at the same time, as I told you, we've done more with Central Asia in the last 2 years than we did in the previous 70 odd years. We're opening up through Afghanistan, because one of the things that has happened is there is the kind of conflict that was taking place in Afghanistan is not there. Yeah. So in terms of,
we'll just get to Afghanistan in a minute, Dr. Yusuf. I will give you the opportunity to tell us about the state of relations with Afghanistan. But before that, I'm sure there are many here in the audience today who will want to know a little bit about, surely, the most pressing crisis that we are facing at the current time. And that, of course, refers to the crisis over Ukraine. Now, what I want to do really here is to set it in some sort of context, and the context, to my mind, really is the idea of Pakistan's, an independent foreign policy for Pakistan. Now, you have been a very strong and passionate advocate of Pakistan renouncing so-called global camp politics. And yet it seems to me that Pakistan is currently having to navigate a particularly treacherous course between opposing powers, which has, of course, been brought very sharply to light following Prime Minister Imran Khan's controversial visit to Russia recently, at a time when Russian President Vladimir Putin faced global condemnation for his decision to invade Ukraine. Now, as I'm sure you know, this visit abroad has been widely seen as misjudged, if not naive. And, there are some who believe that perhaps cancelling this visit while still adopting a policy of neutrality might have been a smarter move for Pakistan, because on balance, Pakistan appears to have lost rather more than it has gained. And that loss, of course, that I'm referring to is the loss of its international standing. There has been great damage to that standing, and I would like you to tell us what your thoughts are on this.
I think the world is a mature enough place at the end of the day not to point fingers and determine for others who's lost and who's gained. I really do think too much is being made of this. The crisis is not of our making. We are not.
What are we making too much of, Dr. Yusuf? That this is a non-issue as far as Pakistan is concerned and its standing? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think if somebody thinks that Pakistan's standing is determined by somebody sitting in another country on whether a Pakistani prime minister should have made a trip or not, I'm not sure that's anybody's business.
So
But let me just
don't
explain.
believe that there's been any damage to Pakistan's standing owing to Prime Minister Imran Khan's recent visit to Russia? I just want to make it clear that we've understood you correctly.
I mean, who determines this standing? I'm not quite sure. I mean, you're almost speaking as if, you know, there's been there's some objective mechanism through which standings of countries are determined. Countries determine or should determine their foreign policies and their actions for themselves. They have a responsibility to explain. And let me explain to you, even this question of, you know, being a supporter of an independent foreign policy, every self-respecting nation has an independent foreign policy. Why should Pakistan's foreign policy be dependent on anybody? That doesn't make any sense to me. And with all due respect, let me also say, you know, that I've seen a lot of commentary coming which is saying, oh my God, Pakistan is choosing an independent foreign policy course. We are an independent country. We are the 5th largest country in the world. We are a nuclear power. Why would Pakistan not have an independent foreign policy? That, I'm sorry, but that question in itself doesn't sound right. I also saw, I think it was in one of the UK papers, you know, the word shamelessly being used for Pakistan and the Prime Minister for visiting another country. I just, it's mind-boggling to me, frankly. Now, let me come to the real issue, which is the trip, which has bothered a lot of people. The trip was pre-planned. The trip was because Pakistan has, as a sovereign country, relations with Russia. It was meant to be a trip to discuss economic interaction. Russia is one of the largest energy suppliers in the world. It does supply more energy to Europe than it does perhaps to all of Asia. That supply, as I know, continues despite all the conversation, all the condemnation, all the talk. So everybody's looking after their self-interest. Let's not become more, holier than thou here. I will make this very clear to you. A pre-planned trip, just like the French president traveled, the German chancellor traveled, others traveled to Russia 2 days, 5 days, 7 days, 10 days before we went. I don't see any hue and cry there. We had gone for a bilateral trip. We had landed there before the conflict began. We were there on a day-long visit. When we were there, I think it was an opportunity to talk to the Russian president and present our view. It's the right of any country to present our view. What is our view? You've seen our public statement. What is it? That we regret that the situation got to this point. We hope that there are immediate cessation of hostilities. We hope that there is no loss of life. We always respect the UN Charter and the principles in that and the sovereignty and integrity of countries. It's for everybody to see. What is wrong with that?
Okay.
But now being in another country on a particular day, and we are being, you know, questioned as if, oh my God, you've changed camps. It was a trip. It was a day-long trip. As a sovereign country, we made the trip. We said the right things. We are back in our country. We're going on with business. We are focused on geoeconomics. We don't want camp politics. We have very good relations with the US. We have excellent relations with UK. We have excellent relations with China. That's how we want it.
Okay.
I just don't see where the problem is.
All right. So obviously you don't believe that Pakistan risks international isolation, though I think people will be hard pressed to draw a comparison between the visits paid by Western leaders, particularly from the European Union, to prevail upon President Putin not to go to war, in comparison to Pakistan seeking to renew ties with Russia, particularly in the wake of, you know, decades of rather chilly relations between the two countries. But we leave it there. I mean, and
let me just let me just come back. So let's just be clear on this. Why do you think that Pakistan was not responsible in saying what it did in Russia and the others were? First of all, that's an assumption that's totally misplaced. Second, let me ask you this. Pakistan being isolated because it made a visit to a country. If that's how the reaction is going to be, well, I'm afraid people are not thinking strategically and maybe be caught in the moment. So I think it's just absurd. And if it happens, then I'm sorry for those who will move in that direction.
Fair enough.
Finally, let me also say, that you talk about renewing relations. Yes, we went there to renew relations. We have relations with Russia. We have economic ties with Russia, trade, energy. We were working on an energy pipeline. Last I checked, gas is still flowing into Europe, despite everything that's happening. So again, let me just repeat, this is not about moral equivalence. This is not about any of that. Pakistan did the right thing, gave the right message. We were already there when this conflict began, and we attacked. If anybody in their right mind can think that this is grounds for isolation, my God, I think the world is headed for a disaster. I would also remind you to please look at the behavior of the net security provider in South Asia that the West now looks at as its darling, and maybe this would change your mind.
Sure. Okay. So you've made a very eloquent statement in defense of this decision, and you clearly, I think it's fair to conclude from this that you clearly believe that the visit ought not to have been cancelled. And I think that there are many sitting in this audience, of course, who will understand that these sorts of high-level international visits take a lot of time to plan and put together, and can't suddenly be cancelled. However, it has been known to happen for far less compelling reasons. I mean, President Xi of China cancelled an all-important trip to Pakistan in September 2014, if I recall. He was coming to formally inaugurate the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor after anti-government protests led by Imran Khan, who was then in opposition, forced a cancellation and rescheduling of that trip. And of course, President Putin himself cancelled a trip in 2012 that was expected, a trip to Pakistan that was expected to serve as a thaw in relations between the two countries. But we'll leave it there, and I think
I'm just not sure where you're going with this, frankly. I'm just not sure. You know that we went there, the conflict wasn't there, and we have said what we've said.
Okay.
I mean, we can keep talking about the trip. I'm sorry, but we are not going to be dictated about the decision on whether we make a trip somewhere or not.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. I think you made a strong point.
And I also want to be absolutely clear that this idea that there's maybe something, an isolation, a backlash. No country, no government in the world is saying this. I'm hearing this on media. I'm hearing this commentary. You are talking about it. We have excellent relations with the UK. We have no problems at all with any European Union country or the US, and there is no problem. So let's not create a controversy which doesn't exist. If there was a problem, these countries would talk to us, and there is simple as that.
Fair enough. I just want to, I know that you are pressed for time, but I do want to talk about Afghanistan. But I will say that, again, as of this morning, to talk of no problems between Pakistan and European powers and the EU seems a little hard to believe, given the rather tense standoff between Pakistan's foreign ministry and the release of a statement by EU ambassadors to Pakistan, urging Pakistan to condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But we're going to leave it there, because I just want to move on to Afghanistan before opening the floor.
If you keep coming back to this, I am sorry, if you keep coming back at this, I will have to respond as an official sitting here. They met our Foreign Office. They issued a press release. The Foreign Office has responded to that. We didn't think there should have been a press release of that nature. I know for a fact that this grouping is going around in multiple capitals, trying to convince them, trying to encourage, trying to pressure, whatever word you may want to use, to vote a certain way, to behave a certain way right now. Countries are making their decisions. About 40 countries who abstained. if 40 countries of the world are now going to be isolated because of this, well, then good luck.
Okay, okay. So, as I said, just a few questions about Afghanistan before giving the audience an opportunity to put a few questions to you. What are the chances of securing peace in Afghanistan and, you know, by extension, of course, stability in Pakistan's western border regions? I mean, these have recently fallen prey to renewed attacks against Pakistani security forces. I mean, do you think Pakistan reposed too much confidence in the Taliban government, in their will and capacity to rein in groups intent on destabilizing Pakistan? I mean, it was hoped at one point that with the Taliban in power, with the exit of Ashraf Ghani's government, that Afghanistan and Pakistan relations between the two countries would regain some kind of even keel, and that on balance Afghanistan would be more favorably disposed towards Pakistan. And yet, to the astonishment of many, we found actually that relations between Pakistan and Afghanistan are not proceeding as smoothly. We've recently had reports of the border fence between the two countries being torn down by groups who allegedly have links to the Taliban. So you last month, I think, in January, led an official delegation to Afghanistan. Can you tell us, without of course breaching any code of confidentiality, how those talks proceeded and whether there is some hope for optimism in better relations between the two countries?
You know, Afghanistan is a classic example of somebody creating a convenient narrative for years, then starting to believe that narrative, and then now being astonished that things haven't worked out as that creator of that narrative believed it should. When did Pakistan ever say that if the Taliban are in power, suddenly everything will be fine and Pakistan will be the happiest country on earth? I mean, the point is there was a Western narrative that said Pakistan controls the Taliban. Okay? At the very least, please acknowledge that that was made up. That if that were true, your current question makes no sense. Right? Why would we have any problem? If you're saying the fence is being cut, if you're saying things are not okay, then either we didn't control them or what you're saying is not correct. But now we will conveniently forget the past 20 years and the effort to malign Pakistan when Pakistan kept saying, we don't want this outcome. We were in favor of the Doha process. We were facilitating the Doha process. The US is on record saying Pakistan was very helpful. Why? Because we were pushing that there should be some intra-Afghan dialogue, and whatever comes out of it, the Afghans will decide. What did the world keep saying? Oh, no, double game. Pakistan controls the Taliban. They want the Taliban. Okay, so then why are these problems? Why are if you are pointing to those problems which you're saying exist on the ground, then clearly there is no control. So magically overnight on the 16th of August, the control disappeared. The point I'm trying to make is these narratives are created for convenience. The Afghanistan one was created because the war was going to hell in a handbasket, but the Western tax...
Created by whom? By hostile powers?
By Western media, by Western media, by Western countries, whoever they were, I don't know. But the point is, clearly somebody should put their hand up and say, yeah, it seems it wasn't correct. Because that's what Pakistan had to live with for 20 years. While we kept saying it is not true, that's what we got in return, right? It's just like this conversation about Ukraine and Russia right now. Oh, Pakistan visited, oh, Pakistan is in that camp. We are continuing to explain what the reality is, and we are continuing not to be heard. So, I mean, it's the choice of whoever wants to decide. Afghanistan is a sovereign country. They don't have that kind of daily violence as they did before. That's good for Pakistan because it's, it causes more instability when that's happening. Thankfully, we did not have a protracted civil war. once the US left. Otherwise, that would have created more refugees for Pakistan. By the way, the same refugees that no European or other country wants to absorb, and everybody expects that Pakistan just continues to deal with this problem. Terrorism, we have said again and again, we cannot accept terrorism from Afghan or any third soil. That problem is not resolved at this point. There is ISKP there. There may be other elements. TTP is definitely been using, misusing their presence and attacking Pakistan. That's a conversation that continues. Okay. And that's a conversation that will continue till we resolve it. What I find, unlike the previous regime, is there is no deliberate undermining of the Pakistani state, no partnership with hostile actors or sinister plot. But yes, there is still terrorism, and we have to work that out because that is unacceptable.
Okay, so hope still burns eternal. Right. Well, what we're going to do is open up the floor to questions. I'm not exactly sure how this is going to work. Mustafa, am I to... Right. So are you going to ask people and then you just take over from here? Is that it? Or
Dr. Shaikh, you can ask people to raise their hands and he can just take the microphone to them.
Oh, right. Okay. So who wants to kick off? The gentleman here. If you could just introduce yourself, that would be great.
Yes, sure. Certainly. Hi, thank you for your presentation.
Can you hear the question, Dr. Yusuf?
I can.
Hi, yes.
I can.
My name is Asif Salahuddin.
I can hear you fine.
No problem. My name is Asif Salahuddin. My question is regarding Dr. Moeed Yusuf, your national security policy, which is focusing on geo-economic issues. The concern is with the glaring example of Ukraine, a state which is neighboring a much more powerful state, and under various pressures in recent times, it was forced to backtrack from its focus on developing its military strength and shifting that focus away to internal other issues. As a result of that, we've seen quite clearly, simply and brutally, a major power on its borders just walk in and which clearly expressed designs and laid claim to the territory of Ukraine, walked into and invaded Ukraine. Similarly, Pakistan mirrors the situation. It's next door to India, which is military budget is almost 10 times that of Pakistan. It has a clear policy design on Pakistan. It's made that very much clear. Yet you are saying, according to your national security policy, you need to shift focus away on human security and economic security, and drawing the focus away from the external threat Pakistan faces. And again, borrowing on the Ukraine example,
Can we just...
Yes, I'm just summarizing. So Ukraine also has sought assistance from what it feels are states which would support it, European Union and everything. Similarly, just to, as a secondary point, I'd like to say Pakistan also at the same time needs to seek assistance from other states and lands which would naturally come to its support as well. And that is the Muslim world, not under the nation state basis, but under an Islamic system basis,
okay,
for which the
Pakistan
Pakistan needs to take leadership.
That's enough.
As a Khilafat system.
So
Thank you very much.
has the national security policy, Dr. Yusuf, overemphasized human security and de-emphasized traditional defense?
Let me answer. First of all, I think, Dr. Saba, you also mentioned this, and perhaps it's also in this question. The national security policy nowhere says that we are moving from geopolitics to geoeconomics. In fact, it's a misnomer to think that these are two separate things. They're essentially the same thing, interlinked, interwoven. And what we are saying is it is a shift in emphasis towards geoeconomics. If you look at the national security policy, it very clearly says that Pakistan requires more resources, both for human security and for our traditional hard security. It does not say that we are going to, in any case, compromise, in any way compromise on one for the other. So that's one. That's why the model is increasing the national resource pie and not just talking about dividing the current pie in different ways, because it's not going to be enough, the resources. Let me, I mean, after saying this, let me say the real answer to your question, which I think is a fact that Ukraine is probably, and I've seen it being discussed as well, is the nuclear weapons. Pakistan, in terms of its military, is one of the strongest countries in the world, alhamdulillah. But if anybody thinks that a larger neighbor can even think of walking in, I think that's you've got to be insane for that. Alhamdulillah, our nuclear weapons give us the security that virtually no other developing country in that sense has. And so I'm not worried about that at all. That said, the NSP is not at all saying that we're going to compromise on one for the other. It is a shift in emphasis, but really what we're talking about is that all boats will rise if your national resource pie grows.
Any more questions? Perhaps I should take something. The lady at the back.
Dr. Sama, I have 10 minutes, so if you want to collect 2 or 3, it may be easier for me to then quickly respond.
I beg your pardon?
I said I only have 10 minutes, so if you want to collect 2 or 3 at a time, then I may be able to answer collectively.
Okay,
If you want to...
So perhaps we'll take 2 or 3 questions in a group.
Yes.
Okay, so yes. That's a good idea. Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for your time. My question is also regarding the national security policy and the citizen security aspect. How do you think that the citizen security might posit a dilemma when arguably our citizens are radicalized through institutions, if the apparently unarmed and the supposedly innocent citizens pose a threat to our national security through the prevalence of extremist ideas? How do you think the national security policy address that? Thank you.
Okay. The gentleman here in the front. Please keep it short so that Dr. Yusuf has maximum time to...
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Rafi Dahar. My question is that, in the year 2021, 85% of the federal government's net receipts were spent on debt servicing alone, which left 15% for everything else that you see. Military spending, development budget, education, all of that is only 15%. And then we continue to go to the IMF to finance us. So essentially, the money that we paid for military, for all these other things, was through borrowed money. And we keep passing the buck to our children. The question is not what is in the national security policy, but what isn't. Shouldn't this be looked at as our biggest threat at the moment, as the biggest national security threat that we talked about being independent. If we are being financing ourselves through borrowed money, surely we can't be independent. Why does the government continue to engage in this disaster? And it's debt servicing as well. How much of the initial capital was repaid?
Okay, got that. Can we take just one more question? Aisha?
I'm Aisha Siddiqa. My question to Dr. Yusuf is that if I could bring you back to Ukraine, and the question is that there is a new world order, uncontrolled, unrelated to Pakistan, which is being kind of thought through and which is happening. Europe is doubling up on its military power. There are a lot of things which will happen. I'm interested to know, how is Pakistan looking at the Ukrainian crisis? And despite that you have defended Pakistan's position, the question is that countries are going to look at Pakistan in a certain way. And so in a way, repeating what Dr. Farzana Shaikh also asked during conversation, how is Pakistan thinking of A, the new world order as it's happening, and B, what will be Pakistan's challenges, and especially how will Pakistan cater to it in a situation where we have a hybrid government, civil military rule, which is under tremendous stress at the moment?
Should we just keep it 3 so that we give you
Sure.
time? I think because I mean the first one, of course, is what the NSP is doing about extremism in society. The second one about the threat posed by what some would describe as the death trap that Pakistan finds
Sure.
itself in. And finally, how does Pakistan envision this so-called emerging new world order, and how is Pakistan looking at Ukraine? Please, Dr. Yusuf.
Yeah, the first one, I mean, the national security policy actually talks about it at length in our section on internal security. We've highlighted this as a specific issue which we need to deal with, not only in terms of de-radicalization, but really this is a deeper sort of change in terms of educating the next generation, in terms of ensuring when we talk about unity in diversity, it very clearly lays out for you what the state of Pakistan and the nation will want to do going forward, building on our diversity as an antidote to radicalization or any extreme views in society. So that's sort of the direction. And as I said, each one of these has one or the other, has one or more sort of plans and strategies under it. And those that don't, we will come up with that as we go forward. In terms of the second question, I think if you've seen the national security policy, it's front and center. In fact, it uses the term financial solvency, if I'm not wrong, saying that this is the #1 problem in terms of not being able to have full independence of economic policy, and that's of course linked to foreign policy. It is financial solvency. And what is financial solvency? It's essentially, again, this problem of resource outflow versus resource inflow. So the issue of debt, and you're absolutely right. Now, very interestingly, just the conversation we've had today, just look at the kind of complexity and the challenge that a country like Pakistan has to deal with. You are talking about why we don't get out of this quote unquote debt scenario, debt trap, whatever. I'm telling you that financial solvency is critical, and that's why we're talking about economic security. And here we are, a country that whose prime minister boards a plane and goes to for a one-day trip to a country, and we are being told that Pakistan will be looked in a certain way, it will be isolated, standing will go down, etc. So those are the compulsions any policymaker deals with, but our direction is very clear. Financial solvency is critical, and you're absolutely right. Without that, these challenges will continue to remain. I have to say, even if half facetiously, it almost seems to me that some wish that Pakistan is seen in a certain way now and dealt with in a way because it chose to board a plane. I frankly tell you, I think this is an issue in perhaps media commentary and those who wish to see this happen. I think governments all around the world are maturer than that. As I told you, I don't see any problem in terms of how we are interacting with the West. We have very good relations. We'll continue to have them. Our economic integration with the West is far greater than any other part of the world. So we're not crazy. We understand, where we want to go, and I don't think there is any problem there. For all that people want to make out of this, oh my God, there may be a rupture between the West and Pakistan. Frankly, there is nothing like that. And before we talk about Pakistan, there are other countries in our neighborhood that may want to answer why they're doing what they're doing. So that's that. In terms of the Ukraine situation, I think it's fluid, it's premature. Let's see how it plays out, and Pakistan will, make the choices based on its national interest.
Well, we have almost reached the end of our time. I very much would like to thank you, Dr. Yusuf, for giving us the time. We all understand a very busy man, so it is really much appreciated. And on behalf of my audience here at the LSE, thank you very much. Mustafa, on to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for attending our third session. National security is indeed a volatile matter and is of fundamental importance for our country. We really appreciate Dr. Moeed Yusuf for taking out time from his busy schedule and for joining and engaging with our audience virtually, despite not being able to fly into the UK. I would also like to thank Dr. Farzana Shaikh for an insightful discussion. I would now like to request everyone to please join us outside for some refreshments. We will be starting our next session at 4:20 sharp, which is the keynote address of the Honorable Justice Syed Mansoor Ali Shah of the Supreme Court of Pakistan. Thank you.